Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm Jon Macri, and I am fired up as we are on the cusp of Week 1. We're recording this just mere hours ahead of Thursday Night Football, Chiefs-Ravens. So naturally, there is no better time to stare at our potential starting fantasy lineups and ponder the right choices to make from now until kickoff. And while you do that, hopefully we can help you make those decisions a little easier, because joining me to preview each of the weeks ahead this season, the great Nic Bodiford is in the house. Nick, you ready for Week 1?
Yeah, I'm pumped. Excited to be here. How are you, John?
Oh, I'm doing good. I am doing good. It's always, an exciting time right before the season, before the injuries and stuff like that start to pile up and crush our souls a little bit as we struggle to set our lineups, and losses might pile up as well because of that. But heading into Week 1, we're all undefeated, so it's a good time of year, man. It's a good time.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, for those that don't know, Nick has been writing up some excellent fantasy content for PFF.com, and will continue to do so throughout the season. So one of the things that we're going to lean into for these weekly preview, like start-sit shows, is Nick's written content, which you can check out now on PFF.com, which a lot is digging into this matchup-based data that we have here in order to find those kind of favorable and less favorable matchups all season long. Things like wide receiver cornerback matchups, quarterback streamers, potential defensive and special team streamers as well. We'll also include some of my O-line, D-line matchup picks, wide receiver man zone stuff once we get that information, as well as general matchups that we feel comfortable relying on, and ones that, we maybe don't in each week as well. So I'm excited to get into it, but quickly, before we do, I want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at DraftKings. NFL Week 1 is here, and a new season means new ways to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Fans have spoken. We want to bet on touchdowns. DraftKings heard us and is delivering. DraftKings Sportsbook is the #1 place to bet touchdowns. We're going to go over a lot of our favorite matchups this week, which maybe you want to take advantage of on DraftKings Sportsbook as well. So if you're ready to place your first bet, try betting on something simple like picking a player to score a touchdown. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $250 in bonus bets instantly, plus 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code PFF. That's code PFF for new customers to get $250 in bonus bets when you bet just $5 and get 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Offer ends September 19th. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in New Hampshire, Oregon, and Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/ftball. NFL Plus Premium only available to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at nfl.com/terms. All right, Nick, I can't wait to get into this. Like I said at the top, really want to highlight your work here, because you've been diving into this matchup data and pumped out some great pieces for the site to get people some wins in Week 1 here. So let's start right at the top with the quarterback position, where we're looking for potential streamers of the week. So, it's Week 1. There's no like quarterback injuries or bye weeks to necessarily be concerned about in Week 1, but that doesn't mean that there aren't teams out there that maybe punted the position altogether, who are kind of looking to stream at the position or for DFS lineups and things of that nature, right? So who is your first QB streamer to target in Week 1?
Okay, so first guy we're going to talk about is Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback Baker Mayfield. They are facing the Washington Commanders, and looking at the most recent spread, looks like they are negative 3.5 point favorites, 42.5 over under. So the Washington defense, I think that schematically they're Dan Quinn will do a good job, and he brought over some of the old pass rush unit from Dallas. But overall, the defense isn't one that I'm really concerned with. I think maybe they'll build into something neat next year. Early in the process, just looking through defenses that we can exploit this summer, the Washington perimeter cornerback core is about as bad as it gets. I think that they're probably the worst in the league. I don't say that lightly. They're doing some kind of bizarre things at safety, where I think their most talented player is Derek Forrest, but it looks like he's set to be a backup this year. Dan Quinn knows better than me, but I'm a little confused by this. Overall, and I think their linebacker core, well, they got Wagner there, but anyway, overall, this is an unimposing defense, and Baker, he's a very good ball distributor, and for readers or listeners want to go take a look at the work that Nathan Yonke did on the preseason data. As I recall, I think the final preseason game, all of the first team snaps came in 3 wide receiver sets, which that makes life easier on Baker. I think he's just going to play his typical point guard role. We've got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, both top 10 receiving matchup advantage ratings in the wide receiver cornerback matchup chart this week. He doesn't rush, so maybe he won't be competing with Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts for number 1 overall, but I think that he'll play efficiently, and I think he's going to rack up multiple explosive pass plays. So I like Baker as a QB streamer this week.
Yeah, I love that call. Like you said, Dan Quinn being there, he doesn't have the weapons that he had in Dallas for pass rush specifically, right? Like he's probably going to blitz Frankie Louisville a lot. He'll get his, kind of interior pressure from Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, but Baker too, like he was perfectly fine under pressure last season, which, it's not necessarily a staple metric, but at least it wasn't a weakness for him in 2023. That Bucs offensive line is solid as well. Like you said, if they're going to be running a lot of 3 wide receiver sets too, they got the rookie Mike Sanderstill, who's likely to play the nickel corner role as well. So there's definitely some potential matchups to take advantage of for Tampa Bay against Washington. So I like the call there for Baker as a potential streamer this week. Let's add in another streaming quarterback option here this week, Nick. One that I know went undrafted in so many leagues this season, despite having a pretty strong arsenal of weapons around him. Who's your next pick?
Next one is Seattle Seahawks quarterback Geno Smith. I too noticed that he went undrafted in a lot of leagues. I don't know if that was because he was dealing with a knee and maybe hip issue in mid-August, but I'm kind of surprised by it. And maybe I'm just, I'm a Seattle guy, so maybe I'm more exposed to Ryan Grubb's offense, which they've kind of delivered mixed signals about how much they're going to run the ball versus how much they're going to pass. But we do know there's going to be they're going to be in 3 wide sets a lot, and they're going to be targeting receivers downfield. I'm kind of in on the whole offense. Like I think Noah Fant's my most drafted tight end in best ball. Anyway, I think Geno is very good throwing the ball more than 10 yards downfield. And perhaps this is a contrarian take. I don't think that the Broncos defense is going to be very good this year. Their edge rush is lacking. Their linebackers are not a very good coverage unit. At cornerback, Patrick Surtain is there. And he is good, but statistically speaking, or at least what he allows other opposing wide receivers to do, he has not established himself as an elite corner. I'm not saying he's not skilled. I'm not saying that he's not going to take a big leap this year. I'm just saying that receivers have been able to do some damage against him. Their number 2 cornerback, Damari Mathis, is on short-term IR. Their slot cornerback, Jaquan McMillian, is not very good. And they, for whatever reason, allowed 2 times. Let's see here. Safety Justin Simmons, as I recall, he is a 2-time defending second-team All-Pro. They just let the guy walk out of the building. Despite having multiple safeties recovering from injury, they brought over, I think it's Brandon Jones from the Miami Dolphins to play free safety, but the guy, PJ Locke, is going to be at strong. Very limited track record. I think this unit is kind of going to be a pushover, and I am excited by what we saw from Bo Nix in the preseason. And I know he's more of a 2 QB league guy than he is a single QB league, but I think that he's going to be able to run the Denver offense competently to the point that Seattle is their offensive pace is going to be pushed. Their pass rate is going to be pushed. So I like Geno here as well as a streaming quarterback 1.
Yeah, this is a good call. Like you said, that Denver defense doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, right? Like their defensive line as well, like maybe one of the most uninspiring units in the league outside of like Arizona, perhaps. But and like I know Seattle's offensive line isn't like amazing either, but you know, it's still an advantage, I think, to take advantage of here. Last year, Geno Smith too earned a 91.3 passing grade when kept clean. That was fifth best in the NFL. We obviously have the weapons there with DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, Tyler Lockett, to take advantage of, outside of Patrick Surtain too, like you said, Jaquan McMillian and Riley Moss, I think is going to be the starting outside corner as well, which again, there's a lot of inexperience in this coverage unit here that there's definitely some matchups to take advantage of in this one as well. And another player that we'll talk about in a little bit too from Seattle. So I like that call. Another quarterback that I did want to shout out, not so much a streamer, but one that I think that fantasy managers might be hesitant to plug into lineups immediately in week one, is Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears. Like, I definitely get if there is hesitance heading into week one from fantasy managers when it comes to plugging like the first overall pick or any rookies into starting lineups, just because we never know what to expect from rookies or how well they'll perform right out the gate. And usually I'm not really relying on them that much right away either, but Williams gets a relatively friendly, like introductory game to kind of kick things off on the right foot here against Tennessee. Like it starts really in the trenches. The Bears have an improved offensive line. We saw that in the back half of last season. They added a new center, Ryan Bates, as well, to continue improving there. They actually had ranked as our 11th best unit in our offensive line rankings heading into the year. And then on the other side of things, the Titans defensive line ranked just 21st in defensive line rankings. There's some solid pieces there, Harold Landry, Jeffrey Simmons, but I think the advantage still goes kind of to the Bears as far as offensive line, defensive line goes. And one of the things that I think that potentially helps Williams with is just buying him some additional time, right? He's already kind of shown a tendency to hold the ball longer before passing, which was evidenced in the preseason. He had a 3.68 second time to throw in the preseason, which is typically long. And part of that has to do with, his ability to extend plays with his legs and stuff like that, but can also be typical of rookies as well, where the game hasn't quite slowed down for them just yet, right? So for Williams, to me, that advantage in the trenches should allow him to get the extra time that he needs to get the ball to his star wide receivers and potentially take off and run as well at times against a defense that's really transitioning with a lot of new personnel this season. I don't expect the defense to immediately be great. I think they can be good, but I think there's gonna be kind of a growing pains period there for Tennessee. So for me, Williams isn't really the kind of rookie that I feel that we need to be hesitant about starting in week one. I should fully expect him to kind of hit the ground running like the top 12 quarterback that he was drafted to be this offseason. So feeling pretty good about Caleb.
Fully agree. I looked at early season exploitable or favorable early season pass and run defense schedules for PFF a month or two ago. Bears far and away. I had to just stop writing up their opponents at I think like week 12 because this looks like it's the softest schedule in the league. So all in on Caleb. Love the call.
Nice. Love that. And yeah, the other rookie quarterback too, like Jaden Daniels, I think fits that bill. Like I feel pretty comfortable about him to an extent as well. I know Nate wrote him up as a start this week in his start sit. So we're a lot of us in on the rookies to kick off the year. What can go wrong with that? All right. So naturally, there's going to be at least one quarterback situation that we don't necessarily love right away. So for me, as far as quarterback sits go or guys that I'm really tempering expectations, I went with Dak Prescott going against the Cleveland Browns. So, the first thing that we know with Dallas's offensive line is they are going through a transition from last season where they were among the best in the league, but they did replace starting left tackle Tyron Smith and starting center Tyler Biotish with rookie Tyler Guyton and second year Brock Huffman, who both of those guys obviously lack experience in the NFL. I think they could still be good, but this figures to be kind of one of those matchups where they don't necessarily have the advantage. They're going up against PFF's fifth ranked defensive line heading into the season, which includes defensive player of the year, Myles Garrett. It's not an ideal starting point for Dallas's new look offensive line. The Browns as a team in 2023 delivered the best overall pass rush grade as a unit with a 91.3, and all of their star difference makers are essentially back for 2024. Dak also invited the 10th most pressures among quarterbacks quarterbacks last season. So yeah, Cleveland, not only do they pose a problem as a pass rush unit, but their coverage unit was also one of the best in the league last season, right? They're bringing back defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz and beginning the year with all their starters healthy, which was one of their issues last year. They were missing a lot of guys, but this Browns defense, to me, I think could pick up right where they left off in 2023 as one of the toughest teams to play against, which resulted in an average of just 14.1 fantasy points per game yielded to the quarterback position. That was the fourth lowest mark in the league last season. So Dallas's passing offense in this one does concern me a bit this week. Not CeeDee Lamb necessarily, but kind of everyone else.
Yep, nothing, no real notes to add there. It's a matchup to avoid.
Yep. So let's get into some wide receivers now. And we'll start with one out of your wide receiver cornerback matchup here. Who do you like first to target this week at the wide receiver position?
Yeah, so I think Malik Neighbors starts things off hot. I've got him as a borderline top 12 player at the position. So the issues with Daniel Jones or whoever they have at quarterback will just be there throughout the year. But Neighbors he was one of college football's best post-catch producers. He is just electric. And I dug through this in an article earlier. Doesn't matter where he catches the ball, if it's behind the line of scrimmage, within 9 yards, 10 to 20 yards, 20 plus, wherever he is one of the most efficient guys after the catch. So as far as the quarterback goes, as long as he's able to just get a hand on it, he's going to produce, however you phrase it, receiving yards over expected, just based on his talent alone. In the wide receiver quarterback matchup piece, I basically just dug through all three of the Minnesota Vikings starting cornerbacks. The one who I think that he's going to take the most reps against is Shaquille Griffin, but he's going to have opportunities against all three. Now, opportunities against Stephon Gilmore is what it is. But the guy Gilmore is very good when he's able to hang with the player, but he does allow explosive gains. Yeah. All of the details are in there, and we can go through yards allowed per coverage snap and everything if we need to. But I think this is just it's a winnable matchup, and I'm not worried about the quarterback play.
Yeah, that's the thing with Neighbors, right? Like, I know he's a rookie. I know the quarterback is Daniel Jones, so that carries that risk. But that's not going to change all season, like you said, really, for Neighbors. We drafted him to be like our wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 for the most part. Like he's going to dominate the target share for this offense every single week, as long as he has a pulse. And for that reason alone, on top of all the talent, he's someone that I'm with you. We should definitely feel confident starting, and especially when given like a prime matchup like this to start the year. So let's get a little deeper here now, Nick. Some of the more like fringe flex type players or a couple wide receivers with decent matchup that we might like in like DFS or something like that this week. Tell us what you like about another rookie, Jalen McMillan.
Yeah, Jalen McMillan, I think, is going to end up being one of my big flag plants this year. He was one of the 3 receivers at the University of Washington. He led the team in targets and receptions 2 years ago, and then battled a recurring grade 2 MCL sprain last year, which kind of allowed Jalen Polk to gain a little more steam and Rome Odunze to be the dominant perimeter player that he is. But McMillan, he's basically just the prototypical inside-outside modern-day NFL. I want to call him a slot receiver, but here's the thing. He successfully transitioned from thriving in the slot to being extremely efficient on the perimeter. I tallied his – now I'm just looking at a big wall of text. But anyway, here we go. McMillan stood out while playing with the first-team offense, concluding the preseason with 1 contested catch, 1 missed tackle forced, and 2 explosive pass plays on 6 targets, while efficiently averaging 3.56 yards per out run through the preseason. Todd Bowles, who is a old-school veteran coach, put this third-round rookie out to be part of 3 wide receiver sets, lining him up on the perimeter, which is out of his typical position, and he crushed it. What I like about McMillan, 1, the talent, but 2, with him starting out on the perimeter, I think he might have access, at least partially, to 2 wide receiver set snaps. I don't know if they're going to just throw him into that in week one, but as we already talked about, I think the Washington cornerback, perimeter cornerback core is the worst in the NFL. And I think the guy is going to get Chris Godwin. He's great in the slot, but he did kind of struggle a little bit on the perimeter. I sort of think that they're going to give him maybe McMillan only gets like 20% of the 2 wide receiver snaps, but that is still great for a rookie. I think he's a phenomenal talent. So I've got him as a flex start this week.
Nice. Yeah, I love that shout as a deeper play. I definitely think there's potential for McMillan to kind of start working his way into more fantasy lineups as the year goes on. But I mean, right away, a nice matchup here against the Commanders. So another player that I wanted to include here that was on my sleeper picks this offseason, but one that I like right away here in week one, Josh Palmer of the Los Angeles Chargers going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. So Jacorian Bennett is the likely outside corner that Palmer will see a fair bit of this week. And for those that don't know, Jacorian Bennett ranked 122nd out of 126 corners in coverage grade last season with a 41.1. Not great. But not only is there a nice matchup to take advantage of here, but this is kind of one of those situations where maybe I'm not fully comfortable with starting a rookie, specifically Ladd McConkey in this situation, but I think Palmer just makes a lot of sense to be wide receiver one there, especially early in the season. And, you know, when I'm looking at potential like deeper plays, I think we could get some reliable production for our starting lineups out of Josh Palmer. He really stands out to me. The Raiders secondary as a whole is actually kind of fine. Like Trayvon Merrick was decent last year. Nate Hobbs is a good nickel, but they brought in Jack Jones as well, who's solid. But I think Palmer could be someone after week one that we're ranking closer to that wide receiver 3 range heading into week 2, once he kind of establishes himself as a strong target earner here in week 1. And we just got news before we came on, Justin Herbert practiced in full today as well. So no concerns about the quarterback situation there either. So feeling pretty good about Josh Palmer in week 1.
Yep. I think he had a career high 1.71 yards per out run last year in his 3rd season. He was kind of stuck down on the depth chart just with the talent that they had in town. I'm excited to see what he can do because he now has his opportunity. He'll sink or swim this year, and he has flashed at times. So I like it. He'll probably lead the team in target share right off the bat.
Yeah, feeling pretty good about that. All right, we talked about Geno Smith earlier. We talked about, you know, the weapons that he has. So naturally, there's going to be somebody in that wide receiver core that we also feel pretty good about going against the Denver Broncos. Who was your wide receiver pick to target this week?
Slot receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba. So JSN, when afforded opportunities to run routes downfield, which didn't happen all that much last year, he was really good. Average 14.8 yards per reception on targets thrown at least 10 yards downfield. I think he's a perfect fit for Ryan Grubb's offense. The guy who we just talked about, Jalen McMillan, that was Ryan Grubb's JSN last year, or 2 years ago, rather. I think that JSN very quickly assumes the wide receiver 2 role in Seattle. And DK Metcalf is a beast, so no shade on him. But I think that JSN could end up as the wide receiver 1 there by the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree. I love Jackson Smith-Njigba. Like, you know, at the very least, like you said, should emerge as Seattle's wide receiver 2. I think that starts right away in week 1 with this beneficial matchup. I'm with you. I love DK Metcalf, but Jackson Smith-Njigba is very talented and a nice fit for this offense with Ryan Grubb coming in, where, you know, he could very well emerge as the wide receiver 1 there. Obviously, you know, it's more difficult because DK Metcalf, like you said, very good wide receiver, but I don't think it's an impossible task for him at some point. Okay, another one of those somewhat deeper plays. I went with JMO. Honestly, I wasn't drafting a ton of Jameson Williams this offseason because I'm not like a huge believer in his like season-long potential and how we might have to deploy him week to week in that offense for fantasy. But I did know there'd be like certain matchups that I'd like him, and week 1 happens to be one of those for me, going up against the Rams. And again, it starts in the trenches here. The Lions own the very top spot on PFF's offensive line rankings heading into the year. I don't think that's a controversial take. That offensive line is excellent. On the flip side of that, the Rams defensive line ranks just 23rd best in terms of PFF's defensive line rankings heading into the year. obviously the loss of Aaron Donald to that Rams defensive line should not be overlooked. He not only like dominated opposing offensive linemen, but he drew more blocking attention than anybody in the league, really. So that opened things up for a lot of the kind of less talented Rams pass rushers, I say respectfully, to get some pass rush home. Without Donald in the lineup, though, that it doesn't open things up as much for them. So one of the key advantages for me that I'm looking at in having that strong offensive line advantage against a below average defensive line is in the extra amount of time that advantage can buy a quarterback, and specifically for his deep threat wide receiver, right? The focal points of this Lions passing attack, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, they're obviously going to feast each week, but there's certain matchups that may prove favorable for Jameson Williams to be included in there. The Rams have upgraded their secondary this offseason, but Williams, again, like he's got the positive camp hype, which has indicated, that he'll be in for a bigger role. He looks to have earned it with strong play this offseason. And in 2023, 16.4 yards average depth of target. That ranked 5th among all wide receivers. It's unlikely to be, completely eliminated from his game as he takes on a bigger role as well, right? And I just talked about, buying some extra time for those deep throws where, he delivered both of his receiving touchdowns in the regular season on throws 20 plus yards downfield, earned a strong 90.4 receiving grade in the process on those types of throws. So I don't mind Jameson Williams this week. I'm looking for the Lions to kind of utilize him right away in a key role week 1, and make him a potential flex / DFS play here for week 1.
Yeah, I think that this specific matchup is going to answer a lot of questions. Jameson Williams, the nice thing with him is that he's not a situational deep threat. He is the number 2. He's going to be out there for a full complement of snaps, which helps reduce the target volatility that some of these downfield players have. I think it's very smart to have drafted him because his range of outcomes is excessively wide. Right. As for the Rams defense, I am optimistic that the talent on the defensive line is going to figure it out. They've got a lot of young, talented guys, but they do have to figure out how to work together. And I think that is made more complicated by the fact that the front office just traded Ernest Jones, who you would know this better than I. As I recall, he was pretty close to the lead league in tackles last year.
Yeah, he was.
And he wore the green dot. Yeah. So he was their defensive shot caller, and they just jettisoned him like a week and a half ago. They also lost. Right. Yeah. They lost Darian. I think it was Darian Kendrick who got hurt. So he was a high volume rotational interior cornerback. Tre'Davious White is coming off an ACL and an Achilles. Hasn't been able to stay healthy. There was a bunch of turnover at the safety position as well. It's a young unit that has to figure a lot of stuff out. I think it's talented, and I think that they can, but there's a lot happening. There's way more change going on in the Rams defense entering week 1 than you would ever want to have. So I think get a discombobulated unit against the burner deep threat. And you've already outlined how great the Detroit Lions offense is. I think this is a great recommendation.
Yeah, this is it'll be really interesting to see how that Rams unit shakes out on defense, because like you said, there's a lot of changes there. I think they can be good. I just don't know that this is the week that we're going to see that, especially against Detroit. So, I'm in on JMO this week. So how about some wide receivers we're avoiding this week, Nick? And we'll start with another one from your wide receiver cornerback matchup article. And this one is going to be happening on Monday night.
Yeah. So Mike Williams, this is sort of strange because he tore his ACL in week 3 last year, which makes him more than 10 months removed. Ideally, I think guys are coming back, I guess, in month 11, but that is so rarely happening now. Now it's like if the re-injury rates between 9 and 12 months don't really differ. So teams are kind of trying to ramp guys up like right off the bat, but he is an older player. They're really taking things slow with him. We just saw how they went with how they did things with Breece Hall last year, who's a lot younger. They've already told us that Mike Williams is going to be on a limited on a snap count. I do think that they're going to drop first free targets for him. They're going to, when they put him out there, they're going to try to use him, but he's not a separator. He's a guy who wins with physicality. Has that been compromised? We don't know. I assume at least a little bit. I think Matt Harmon has done some work on that I've heard Edwin Porras talk about. Lastly, the San Francisco secondary, they have some change. Rooting for Talanoa Hufanga to make a strong return from the ACL because that guy is amazing. But Shavarius Ward, last year, towards the end of the season, they put him in shadow coverage twice against big, beefy, burly number one wide receivers. And we're calling this off the top of my head. I think one was A.J. Brown, and then I'm blanking on the other one. But basically, when the way that they've kind of treated Ward is like, if there's a big giant that we have to go battle against, then we're just going to stick Ward on him on the perimeter and try to have him shut him down. And I think that that's a lot easier to do with Mike Williams being on a snap count because they don't have to just commit the whole game plan to like, all right, we can't use Ward for anything else. He's just got to be on Mike Williams. So they can do this for like the 2/3 snap count or whatever it's going to be, not disrupt the game plan a whole bunch. So I advise caution on Mike Williams until we see otherwise.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I'm worried about, there being a longer ramp up period for him right before he's, utilized fully, right? So right away that's a big concern. Now, he does have that big playability where he can deliver like startable fantasy production even without full-time snaps. But like you just laid out, it's not the best week to kind of bank on that going up against the 49ers there. So I'm with you, definitely not starting Mike Williams this week. Okay, I talked about being concerned for Dak and that Dallas passing offense. So that is the same for Brandon Cooks going up against the Cleveland Browns. Again, I'm not saying CeeDee Lamb. There aren't fantasy managers benching CeeDee Lamb this week, despite the tougher matchup. But that doesn't necessarily translate to the Cowboys' tertiary options like a Brandon Cooks. So Cooks, very much like Jameson Williams, who we just talked about, owned a relatively high average depth of target in 2023. He led the Dallas Cowboys with 13.4 in that regard and ranked among the top 30 wide receivers in average depth of target. So on the contrary to Williams, where we expect the Lions to have more time to hit those deep passes, it isn't likely to be the same for Dallas going against a very dangerous pass rush in Cleveland. I just laid that all out about why they were so good last year, obviously led by Myles Garrett, but also on pressured plays last season. Brandon Cooks saw the 8th lowest target rate on the team at 13.5%. That was behind Michael Gallup and even running back Tony Pollard. So I think Cooks, I like him as a sleeper this season. I don't expect him to start hot right away in 2024. Specifically here in week 1, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he won't be startable in other weeks. But again, this matchup against the Browns is one of the tougher ones that we saw last season, and I have no reason to believe that that's going to change heading into this season.
Yep, he's a 30-year-old downfield separator. It's just rough, and I think Jake Ferguson can probably just take over as the number 2.
Yeah,
I don't want the number 3 pass catcher in a volatile role against Cleveland. That's tough.
Yeah. It's definitely not ideal. All right, how about a couple more of your wide receiver sits here, Nick?
So this pains me because I really like Demario Douglas, and there's a lot of stuff about the New England offense that I like, but this week against Mike Hilton, that's just a tall order. Douglas did not get the 2 wide receiver usage that I was hoping he would get. He did line up on the perimeter a little bit in the preseason, so maybe this can translate. And I do think that they are going to run a ton of 3 wide because they've got Ben McAdoo and Alex Van Pelt who transitioned to that 11 personnel system last year. But they're figuring out the quarterback stuff. I personally think that they should go with Drake May. Just let him figure it out. I don't want to put a rookie, throw him into the fire when the team is 0-4 and the whole city's mad. And it seems like a bad situation. Like, just let him take his lumps and learn. Anyway, that's my thought. But he might only be in 3 wide receiver sets. He's facing one of the more talented slot cornerbacks. And I broke down in the wide receiver cornerback matchups article how Demario Douglas wins. He's tiny, but he's really slippery, and he's good at picking up yards after the catch. Mike Hilton, he closes on the ball quickly. He's very agile. He kind of made his name early in his career as a interior blitz specialist. He's good. His movement skills are high end. I think he's going to contest a lot of the catches. I am rooting for Demario Douglas, and I have quite a lot of him on dynasty teams and such. But I just think this is kind of a tough matchup for him to go out there and give us a shot at a high volume reception day or a touchdown or anything like that. It kind of just reads like a 4 catches for 40 yards type thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm with you. And it's a tough situation, right? Like there's a lot of ambiguity of who, will kind of emerge as the wide receiver one there in New England. And there's definitely value in getting that right, like especially in week one, but potentially DFS lineups and stuff like that as well, because it's not a group that a lot of people are going to be targeting. It's going to be a lot of avoiding of New England because it's the Patriots offense, because it's Jacoby Brissett. So, if we can maybe even eliminate one of those options from that list and narrow it down a bit more, like by looking at Demario Douglas and his matchup, then that in itself, I think, could be useful as well. So I really like adding Demario Douglas in the list today. How about one of the last wide receiver sits that we have on here? You mentioned Michael Wilson and looking at the Arizona offense versus the Buffalo defense. What'd you like here?
Yeah, so Michael Wilson, he's got a big opportunity this year. He's another guy who I will be rooting for. The Buffalo Bills secondary or at least their cornerback core is really good. Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford on the perimeter. I think it's Teron Johnson. Yeah. I like it. It's a really good 3 cornerback group. I do think that Rasul Douglas is basically just going to travel with Marvin Harrison Jr. I've got it buried in here somewhere, but I think he shadowed 4 times after he was traded to Buffalo in season. But Christian Benford, the number 2 guy, like he's not a pushover. He is a really good perimeter cornerback, and you just stack them up comparatively. Michael Wilson he has not shown the type of per play productivity that you want to test this high quality of a number 2 cornerback. And you mentioned the more comments about defenses overall. I did realize that I failed to dissect the Minnesota Vikings defense in the Malik Neighbors section above, but we can circle back to that. On the other side of the ball here, the Cardinals defense, I think Buffalo is just going to. So the Cardinals defense is one of the defenses that I wrote up as both a pass and run defense to target this week. They have issues at interior defender, linebacker, safety, and cornerback. I'm rooting for Jonathan Gannon. Explosives. And, I think he's gonna do fun stuff. He's a talented coach, but this defense, the safeties, they've done a lot. Jalen Thompson, Budda Baker, they've done a lot to kind of mask some of the issues, but they are older. They're getting hurt more. They in one of these articles, I went into the statistical decline in these 2 guys' play. It's a problem, and they do not have, like, they brought in Sean Murphy Bunting to be the number 1 cornerback, and he is not a very good cornerback. With all due respect to him. So I think that Buffalo, if you're splitting hairs, or you're making start sit decisions, and you got a Buffalo player. I think that that offense is just going to be able to play efficiently. They're going to get down to the red zone a lot, and then it's with the way that pass catching core is shaken out. I think it's kind of dealer's choice. And I think even like if you're in a crazy deep league, a crazy deep dynasty league or something, like I've got Ray Davis in a flex spot this week. I think he can just sort of fall into the end zone. Spending a lot of time here on the Arizona Cardinals defense, but anyway, it's one to target this week, and I would also avoid Michael Wilson.
Yeah. So, I like the call here. And if I remember correctly from last season too, Michael Wilson was a player that when I was doing the wide receiver man zone coverage report, he was one that did really well against zone, but struggled against man coverage. And from what I remember too, like, again, just off the top of my head, the Bills were a lot more of like a mixed group, like where they didn't necessarily lean one way or the other. They tended to mix in quite a bit of man coverage as well. So I'm with you. I think this one makes perfect sense. Before we get into the running backs, just a quick ad break here. Hey everyone, we're just going to take a quick break to let you know that this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. In today's hectic world, it's easy to focus on everything except yourself and your own mental health. Sometimes you need a little help to help make sure that stays on track as well. Therapy can be really useful to get a better understanding of how your mind actually works and to become more aware of your own patterns of behavior and how to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just people struggling with something specific. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is a convenient, flexible, and entirely online way to get therapy that's right for you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you could switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/PFFfantasy today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFFfantasy. All right, let's look at a few running backs for this week, because there are at least a few situations that I'm not overly confident in, a couple that I am, and I'll start with the one that I'm feeling pretty good about. It's James Cook, the Buffalo Bills, going against the Arizona Cardinals. Now, Cook is likely in most fantasy starting lineups this week, but for me, there's at least reason to believe like expectations could push him into being like a top 5 running back for the week. The Bills come in ranked as a top 10 offensive line this offseason. The Cardinals come in ranked dead last in PFF's defensive line rankings. We know that when Joe Brady took over as the offensive coordinator in week 11 and into the playoffs, the Bills ranked tied for the highest run rate in the league at 45.9% last season. But again, another advantage in the trenches here, combined with the potential to run more often, I think definitely helps James Cook. And as a smaller back, like that opportunity to get additional yardage with positive run blocking, it's often necessary for success. And Cook benefited from this last season. We saw that with Buffalo's offensive line helping generate 41.9% of Cook's rushing yards to come from before contact. That was the second highest mark in the league, including the playoffs. So you mentioned Ray Davis. I'm at least hopeful, or, for the potential for some more goal line touches as well for James Cook this season, because again, there was something that Joe Brady kind of hinted at, in the offseason about James Cook having more work in short yardage situations. So maybe that's some hopium on my part, but I am liking James Cook quite a bit, especially with this matchup here in week 1. So again, another guy that's probably in starting lineups, but one that I'm just feeling a little bit more bullish about this week.
Yep. No, I think this is totally reasonable.
Yeah. Okay, good. And then one of the other ones that as the offseason has gone along, outside of, one short dip of, with rumors of being in the roster bubble, which didn't last long. One of the other players that I am feeling pretty good about here in week 1 is Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos going against the Seattle Seahawks. He looks locked in as the RB1 in Denver right now, despite, some potential usurpers waiting in the wings here in Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime, whatever. Last year, we know he had a down year in terms of his efficiency metrics, but was also coming off a pretty significant knee injury, right? And now just further removed from that injury. And by all accounts, it sounds like he looks like his former self, which I think is very encouraging, especially on a team that we know wants to run the ball and have a big advantage in the trenches as well. I think they have the second best matchup according to our offensive line, defensive line matchup tool right now, Denver's offensive line versus Seattle's defensive line. So that was encouraging to see. It was a defense that was, Seattle was pretty leaky as far as yielding fantasy points to the running back position last year already. And now we're without Bobby Wagner and without Jordan Brooks, who were 2 excellent tacklers at linebacker last season, which I think helps open things up a little bit more as well. So I just think there's some really nice potential here for Javonte Williams to show that, he's kind of back to being that locked in fantasy starter again. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I think that Sean Payton has his. I love Audric Estime. It's kind of a bummer landing spot for him. But what Sean Payton did for a long time with his Saints running back duos was he featured both of them as dual threats. One of them would be kind of the big bodied banger, and the other one would be, Alvin Kamara. He's like 6'1", 215 or so. He's not small either. Right. But one would be, more toward running the ball, the other more toward catching passes, but they like Mark Ingram's reception totals were high. Sean Payton loves throwing the ball to the running backs. He just likes getting the ball in their hands in space. I think that you mentioned the very brief speculation that Javonte Williams might be on the roster bubble may end up being one of the biggest buy lows in this offseason. Like I think Javonte Williams is going to touch the ball a lot, and I really like Jaleel McLaughlin too. I just think Javonte is like he could have a kind of a game wrecking season. I'm very excited about the usage.
Yeah, same here. Especially like you said, the quarterback's ability to dump the ball off to the running back in Sean Payton's offense. Like Bo Nix, we know, was very low average depth of target quarterback coming out of college, or at least at Oregon, right? So that translates to the NFL, and what's a shorter average depth of target pass than to a running back, right? So I think Javonte Williams could definitely eat up a lot of those touches. Another one that we talked about quite a bit this offseason as far as opportunity to start the year that I feel pretty good about here in week 1 is Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers going up against the New Orleans Saints. So Hubbard is definitely someone that I feel pretty comfortable about right now, for as long as Jonathan Brooks is on the PUP list as well, potentially even beyond that if he performs well as a starter. Like, sure, Miles Sanders could get mixed in there as well, but I think Carolina showed us in the preseason that Hubbard is going to be kind of their clear RB1. Like, obviously that could change across a full game on any given week, but the usage was pretty encouraging in Hubbard's favor with both those running backs in the game during the preseason. So, he's a back that we got pretty cheap in drafts for those teams that, drafted him and are maybe weaker at running back. So the early portion of this season is where I'd really be looking to kind of deploy him when I can, potentially over some of our sit options that we'll go over here in just a second. But I don't mind Chuba Hubbard as a potential flex play this week at all.
Yeah. I think that Chuba Hubbard is a sort of a replacement level player, and Rachaad White ran as a replacement level player last year. Didn't stop Dave Canales from giving him a ton of carries and, more importantly, a ton of targets. Chuba Hubbard, he's a fine pass catcher. He can go do it. I think he, with Jonathan Brooks out, I don't think his efficiency matters. I think he's just going to get a ton of touches. So, yep, totally makes sense.
Nice. So let's get into a couple situations that at least I'm looking to avoid. I'll be interested to get your thoughts on it. But the first one that kind of stands out is DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears going against the Tennessee Titans. Now, this is one that I kind of knew we'd be talking about just based on the preseason usage and everything that Nate had highlighted as a concern coming out of the preseason as well. And then I looked, Nate also has him in his start sit article as a sit, which I kind of assumed would be the case. But Shane Waldron was going to be one of the primary reasons as to why that is, because of his tendency to rotate running backs based on situations. That didn't really change in the preseason, and the Bears have running backs who we expect to kind of work into the mix there with Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson as well. Like, this is a situation that, at least in week 1, I'm looking to kind of avoid until we get confirmation across a full game's worth of usage. I know Swift was drafted relatively high this year, to potentially be a lot of rosters like RB2. I just don't think he's necessarily worth the risk here in week 1 when these types of, question marks are kind of hanging over the backfield from what we saw in the preseason. And the Titans were also a strong run defense against fantasy running backs last year. So we'll see how much of that carries over, obviously, with a lot of new personnel and stuff. But at least there's just another concern to kind of add to the mix. So Swift is somebody that I'm out on this week. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, he's the type of guy who, if I was doing like a 1-week draft, I just wouldn't want to have to make the decision on.
Yeah.
Khalil Herbert, great rusher. Roschon Johnson, he's got a toe injury right now, but he is. I think I did break this backfield down. Khalil Herbert is a more efficient rusher than DeAndre Swift, and Roschon Johnson is a more efficient receiver than DeAndre Swift. So it's like 3-man backfields are not ideal. If he can separate, or like, because they paid him a lot of money, if they just give him the touches, then he could be fine. But right now it looks like a 3-man backfield. So that I don't I don't want anything to do with that. And they just got Ernest Jones. We talked about that earlier. He went from the Rams to Tennessee. So now you have one of the NFL's sharpest, how do you say it, ball knifer tours. He's gonna get 10 tackles this week. It's rough for Swift.
Yeah, Ernest Jones, known ball knifer tour. As
there you go.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so the other situation that I'm looking to avoid is literally on the other side of the ball here. In the same game, Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears of the Tennessee Titans going against Chicago. It's really the same kind of concern, really, where that we have with DeAndre Swift. I would have that same kind of concern with the Titans running backs, where there are definitely going to be plenty of rosters, where I hammered wide receiver early, for example, that, Tony Pollard, for example, is going to end up being a potential starting running back for me. I also like the breakout potential for Tajay Spears this year as well. But again, like, I'm worried about that potential for a heavier rotation than expected here in Tennessee to start the season. Like, I'm fine starting like Chuba Hubbard, Javonte Williams over both of, Tony Pollard or DeAndre Swift this week, just to kind of wait and see how the usage shakes out. Like, I don't feel like it's worth the risk here in week 1. So if we can avoid any surprise usage that ends up being really poor for fantasy, I'm looking to do that in week 1. I'm not looking to risk it. Like, can it work out? Sure. But it's not something I think we need to shoot for in week 1 when we're all undefeated anyways and want to keep it that way.
So I think I'm not afraid of the Tennessee backfield purely because I think it's only a 2-player show. Right. And they're probably not going to push for, I don't think one of them is going to take 65% of the rushing attempts, which for the listener, I know people talk about like, oh, so he's going to get 90%. No, the lead backs get like 65, 70% in an extreme case. I think it'll be very close, but since there's only 2 of them, I'm not afraid of it. But you kind of outlined the exact thing with where we were drafting these guys. We kind of that was sort of baked into the cost. Like, you got them as discount RB2s. I am really curious to see how the Chicago defense fares against this unit. They have good run defense linebackers. They've got Montez Sweat. Their other 3 down linemen aren't that great. So I kind of expect the Titans to get a little push off the ball. I think they'll be fine. I think the running backs will be fine. But I think we'll learn a lot this week. I guess I'm fine on them.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I felt about them, like, kind of going into the year as well, right? Like, where, what, like, I'm drafting them, I'm looking at them, I'd be like, yeah, I'm fine starting them. For me, just kind of waiting on week 1, but I'm with you. That does make me feel like a little bit better, just kind of framing it that way, right? There is only 2 of them. And, as much as, there might be like the passing options to spread the ball to as well, it's not as bad out of the backfield when you just consider that it's Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. So, still feeling pretty good about them for the season long as well. Let's go to some tight ends now. And we only got a couple here. We got a start and a sit. So one of the starts, I knew Nate was going to include Taysom Hill in his start sit, and I knew I was going to as well. Again, just for talking with Nate like all off season, we kind of have been on the same wavelength for Taysom Hill. And, unless you're playing on MFL, for example, where he's only listed as a quarterback because they're stubborn, then he's definitely going to be in play at tight end this week, especially for those streaming the position, right? And that's from his usage in this offense, which I'll add here straight out of Nate's start sit article, which you can check out now on PFF.com. In the preseason, Taysom Hill played 20 of 31 snaps with the starters. He played 4 at halfback, 5 at fullback, 8 at tight end, 2 in the slot, and 2 out wide. So considering that this is a new offensive coordinator and Clint Kubiak coming in, I think it's a pretty telling that they want to continue to utilize Taysom Hill as they have in recent years and manufacture touches for him in different ways, like the wild card that he is. It's a decent matchup against Carolina as well. And also, as Nate pointed out in his start sit, last time that Hill played against Carolina, he ran the ball 9 times for 75 yards, which is just so damn tantalizing for the tight end position. He's going to be difficult, I think, to keep out of the lineup with that type of usage again this season. So I am yeah, he's been somebody that's slowly and steadily moved up the rankings all off season long for me. So how are you feeling about the wild card Taysom Hill heading into week 1?
He has like a wider range of outcomes than Kyle Pitts. Like and because it's Kubiak is clearly like, does he see him? So you mentioned that they lined him up in the back like as a fullback and a halfback. Do they see him as Kyle Juszczyk? In which case, like, that's a lot of blocking. Do they see him as George Kittle, who can do Juszczyk things? Like, okay, now that's amazing. If you have a player below the Evan Ingram, David Njoku tier, the case, there's just a case to be made for Taysom Hill against everyone else. That is, well, who else has access to 4 or 5 rushing attempts, 1 or 2 passing attempts, and maybe 1 or 2 targets? And it's just no one has. So roll the dice, because he could be the number 2 running back.
Mm-hmm.
Like he could be that. That's crazy.
Yeah. And a constant touchdown threat as well, right? Like, because of his usage around the goal line. So there's just like so many ways that it could go, like you laid out. Like somebody like Jake Ferguson, for example, who, again, we expect to kind of be the number 2 option in Dallas on the season. But again, it's not a great matchup for that Dallas passing offense going against Cleveland. Like, that might be a situation where, I drafted Jake Ferguson as my tight end 1, but then quickly followed it up with a Taysom Hill for insurance and certain matchups. That could be one of those situations where I probably lean Taysom Hill this week. And then one of our sits here at tight end, Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is another one where I could get into the mind of Nathan Yonke and know a certain player was going to be on his sit list. It was either going to be Pat Freiermuth or Cole Kmet in week 1. I went with Freiermuth, and as much as I was excited about like his bounce back potential early in the offseason, that excitement has definitely been tempered as we've gotten closer to the start of the season, based on, again, what they showed us in the preseason, where Freiermuth was not seeing nearly enough playing time in passing situations, which we already figure to be low in Arthur Smith's offense in a run-heavy offense. And as they rotated different tight ends onto the field into different situations, it just felt worse and worse. So I'm very concerned that we get another year like last year from Freiermuth now, where he was really not startable at all for fantasy. Maybe that usage changes in the regular season, but again, it's not worth the risk here in week 1. So I'm staying away from him entirely until we see something more encouraging out of that team.
Yep.
No, go ahead.
They're going to play Darnell Washington it's going to be bad.
Yeah, Connor Hayward is still on the team. I think Cam Hayward's brother, like I would expect him to get in there as well. All right, Nick, I'm really excited about this next element to our weekly previews. It wasn't something that we covered last year, but you have been writing up potential defenses to stream as well on a weekly basis now, which many of us are going to be streaming that position. So definitely worth mentioning here. Who are the defensive special teams units that you're starting this week?
So Cincinnati Bengals versus New England Patriots, they're kind of the headliners here. I wanted to be excited about the Patriots offensive line because they brought in new guys and it's a new scheme and all that. It just doesn't look good. Cincinnati, they're 8.5-point favorites. Trey Hendrickson is just going to be able to run all over the place. Yeah. Jacoby Brissett, like, he can manage games fairly well, but I think this is just going to be overwhelming. And the Bengals secondary they lost Chidobe Awuzie, but Cam Taylor-Britt, he is really good at getting in wide receivers' heads. I think that the Bengals they're gonna rack up sacks, and they're probably gonna pick off Brissett once, maybe twice. So they're the top streamer of the week. Do you want to add anything on them?
No, I like the call. I mean, the Bengals, they're a strong defensive unit, and it feels like we could potentially be picking on New England quite a bit this season as well for that offense.
Yeah. The other one, teams that we've already talked about here, Chicago Bears defense versus the Tennessee Titans. I was really hoping that the Bears would bring in another edge rusher. Like, I thought maybe they could try to go get who's the disgruntled edge in on the New York Jets.
Son Reddick.
Yeah, I was hoping they could maybe make a play for him. Just because it's like Montez Sweat and then a really good secondary, and then tackling linebackers, and it's fine. But like against Tennessee, Will Levis, the dude, he just lets it rip, and that's tough when you are facing. I really like the Bears second. So Jalen Johnson, Jaquan Brisker, Kyler Gordon, he had some injury stuff, but he finally kind of turned it around. And I think they're just going to move Sweat around. And although he does, his like player versus player matchup is against right tackle Nicholas Petit-Frere, who had a 46.0 PFF pass blocking grade over the last 2 seasons. So I think it's going to be kind of a rough day. I do think the game script is going to be fun, but I think it's going to be a fruitful day for Chicago.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I did the IDP rankings this week, and Montez Sweat was a player that I highlighted in that rankings piece because of that matchup against the Tennessee offensive line, Nicholas Petit-Frere specifically. But yeah, this is a good one here. Any other defensive notes that you want to include here? I know you mentioned you were talking about Indy's run game versus Houston's run defense as well.
This one's super interesting because the Colts are 2.5 point underdogs, last I checked. But Houston's defense is built like they're very smartly just leaning all in on the defensive passing game. They allowed 3 of their top 6 run defense tacklers to walk in free agency. They brought in Azeez Al-Shaair, who is fine, but he misses a lot of tackles. And the 2 interior linebackers in this group, Henry To'o and Christian Harris, are like the 2 worst linebackers, starting linebackers in the league. It's crazy. One of them is actually hurt right now, so they've got guys who couldn't beat them out in camp who are going to be contributing. I think Indianapolis, just a whole ground game, so that includes Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, and maybe occasionally Trey Sermon, are, I think, even though they might be trailing a little bit, they're just going to be ripping off chunk gains on the ground. So I don't think fantasy managers who are maybe concerned about game script being unfavorable for the Colts run game, I don't think that they need to worry about that. The thing that I glossed over earlier with the Malik Neighbors section is just that the Vikings defense, both pass and run, leave a whole lot to be, Giants run defense. That's where I meant to pivot. That's why things got confusing. The Giants defense is different analysis there on Minnesota. The Giants defense, I like Dexter Lawrence, great. Brian Bird's great. Outside of that, oh my goodness, Kayvon Thibodeau he was not great last year. And I know people are excited about the name and excited about his potential, but he left a lot to be desired. He produced a 6.4% pass rush win rate. That is really bad. And they let their best member of the secondary go, Xavier McKinney. He did a ton. He was active in coverage. He's the highest graded coverage safety in the NFL. And he was also one of their biggest run defense tacklers. He had 37 run defense tackles. That ties for 6th at the position. Outside of those 2 defensive line players, this defense is like just a pushover unit. So it's an ugly matchup because it's the Minnesota Vikings and New York Giants, but there are matchups to be played here that I think can be fruitful.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, love that. Great bonus content there covering some of the defense stuff as well. But that's going to do it for us here in week 1. Thank you all very much for listening or watching on the YouTube. We appreciate you all. Let us know if you like this format, if you found it helpful. I also want to shout out, to join our Discord channel as well, which will link in the episode description, because Nathan Yonke will be answering start sit questions there Sunday morning. So if there are players that we didn't cover today that you want more clarity on, make sure you get your questions answered there. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. And very importantly, a huge thank you to Nick for providing so much of the content we're looking for in our start sit decisions. I'm looking forward to doing this with you each week, Nick. Going to be a fun season. So let the good people know what else you have going on and where they can find more of you.
Sure. So every week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you guys can find quarterback streamers, defense streamers here at PFF, wide receiver, cornerback matchups, and defenses to target. I'm doing some written work over at Roto World. A lot of stuff on the news desk. Thank you, dear listeners. Remember, this is the only fantasy football podcast hosted by two 30-something redheads.
Yay.
So please give us a like and subscribe if you're of Scottish Irish heritage. But yeah, seriously, this is gonna be a lot of fun. I'm excited, thankful for the opportunity. This was great, John.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Shout out to the PFF Ginger podcast here. And yeah, definitely check out more of Nic's work. And then for me, we got the offensive line, defensive line matchups to target and avoid. That'll be out on Friday. We got the IDP preview episode as well in the podcast feed and on YouTube. IDP rankings, IDP fantasy report. Next week, wide receiver man zone coverage report will start back up again. Nate and I will be doing or actually Nate's going to be doing the week 1 live recap Sunday night. So make sure you're paying attention for that to come out. And he might be able to answer some questions there. And then we'll be talking waiver wire targets on Tuesday, Nate and I, and then back to previewing week 2 next week. Football is back, baby. Enjoy week 1. And until next time, peace out.